Today we'll discuss best practices in regards to group work inclusivity. It's also our hope that you'll be convinced of the positive impact of co-collaborative activities and the impact that they have on our students. With a few teaching strategies and recommendations, we hope some of our suggestions will encourage you to promote teamwork activities among your students. Despite social distancing and the constant unpredictability of the pandemic, students still need to learn the value of interpersonal skills and how to negotiate intellectual ideas and opinions. We'll touch on the importance of teacher preparation and planning when assigning group work, along with suggestions for implementation and evaluation strategies that can promote student success. We also like our students to regard group work as a positive opportunity for engagement, ultimately preparing them for the multitude of group interactions that they'll face in their professional lives. So let's now discuss how we can best engage all students while meeting the varied objectives of collaborative learning. Thank you.
Okay, so, and I would say welcome also. I'm glad that you're here. I know that it's hard to do this on a Friday afternoon, but we appreciate your presence for sure. And I know that we can learn from each other, which is what I hope. So some of the goals that we have for this session, this 90 minutes that we're going to spend together about group work, first and foremost is to understand the benefits of group work, because there are many advantages to it. We want to also discuss experiences with and concepts behind cooperative and collaborative group learning, learn best practices for using group work, discuss how to teach teamwork skills, because we know we can't just lump people together in a group and expect that they know how to work together. So teaching those skills to be part of a team is functional and very important. We're going to have you practice one example of group and inclusive collaborative behaviors today. It's a modified strategy, but we'll have you try that today. And then we'll also examine some ways of assessing group work as we go along.
So some initial questions about group work that we may all have are, do you have your students engage in group work? So like, where are you starting at here with your student engagement? Like some instructors may do some informal group work. Some people may do formal group work. There are project-based and like out of class and in class. So how do you have your students engage in group work, and how much of it do you do? And then is group work a skill worth building in your courses? Like, is this one of the aims of your courses? And that's one important thing to consider as well. And what are some best practices for overseeing group activity? Along with, how do you teach teamwork skills? So going back, if it is a skill worth developing, how would you develop teamwork skills? And then finally, wrapping up, how would you even assess group work? Like, there's so many different variables going in, from the presentation or the activity to how they relate to each other in a group. How would you go in to assess that? So these are some initial questions that you should be starting to think about as we're going and getting started here with the presentation.
And of course, because this entire afternoon session is going to be about group work, of course there's going to be breakout sessions where you are going to be doing some group work about talking about group work. How meta are we going to get? So for your first breakout session, which we're going to, I believe, time for 5 minutes.
Sure.
Right.
Tell me which one.
For this breakout session, this is just something to break the ice, because we've all used group work in our classroom before in some form or fashion. So please share your experiences with using group work in your classroom. There's a lot to talk about, I'm sure, but let's focus on these 3 particular questions. Number 1, how successful has group work and interaction been for not just your students, but also for yourself? Also, as an educator, how can you play an active role in group work within your classroom? Because you're not just there to just walk around and make sure everyone's just doing their job. What else can you do? And also, and here's the hot button topic because of this, how has group work changed in your classes during the pandemic? Just a little something for you to think about as you head out to your break room or your breakout rooms. So I guess when they're ready.
Yep. And before I send you out, you might want to take a screenshot of the prompts for your breakout?
Yep, the prompts are also in the slides I shared.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So let's go
Can
ahead
you
and,
put me in a group, Denise? I had to switch computers.
yeah, I'll put everybody in a group.
Oh, I thought you were already doing that. I'm
No,
sorry.
no, not yet. Not yet. I just want to make sure that everyone got the slides. Okay, so Chris just shared a link. Go ahead and open up that link so that you have the prompts, and I'll get you into your breakout rooms.
Can you share it again, honey? Because I just had to
Sure.
get in, I had to switch computers. The other one didn't work.
There
Thank
will be 3 to 4 people per room. We'll give about 8 minutes. We found in the last session that 5 went really fast.
That's fine.
And then you'll see a timer in the upper right-hand corner. Okay. Thanks for your patience while I balance the rooms. Thanks for not leaving as soon as group work was mentioned.
Oh no, group work.
Yeah. Let's see, okay.
Abracadabra.
Okay, here we go. Goodness. Billy, you did not get placed in a room? What happened? Nope, you just haven't joined yet. There you go. Okay. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Okay. How is your week going over there? Coming along?
It's good, super busy, but good. Just trying to get people registered.
We all need to get everybody registered, that's for sure, because some of my classes are low and they're like, oh, well, we can't cut a class because there's only 9 right now. We got to wait, see how many people can get in. All right.
Yeah, our enrollment is the lowest it's been, like in exercise science, than it's been like for so long. It's scary.
So we had a good group discussion about group work.
Tell us what you learned, Lynn. That'd be awesome.
Well, I think one of the things that we learned from all the different content areas is that most people are doing some form of group work. Group work can work if you have a particular, like there's a lot of different ways to do group work. And I had brought up Jigsaw, and we were just having a discussion at the end where, how would you apply that, say, to math, and, even if they're working on worksheets, you can still cut it up and make an expert group, which is 4 students studying a particular thing. And then they go and they divide out. So you got all 1s together, so all 2, 3, 4s, and then 1s go to 1, 2, 3, 4 groups, and they teach what they learned. So they're getting the chance to be the teachers themselves. And by doing that, they tend to retain the information. So I think sometimes when some people think, oh, group work, it's putting people together. And that's true in the base part of it. But like online, you can do blog groups and have people study articles and then go in and put their own blog entries in. I mean, there's a ton of ways to do it. So that's what we were kind of like sharing our own examples.
Yeah, that was a good one. And you spoiled my section because I'm going to talk about Jigsaw a little bit later. We're going to practice that just in a modified way. But
Sorry about that.
no, it's a great technique for sure. If you haven't used it, it's a good one.
Yep.
But yeah, in our group we had some good discussion too about how it really is helpful to have those roles and have very specific goals for the group ahead of time so everybody knows what they're supposed to do. And using peer evaluations at the end of group so that you can hear how everybody's done. Anyone else have any other ideas from their group?
So in my group, we discussed how peer editing works, and I was surprised to hear that the professors in STEM also do peer editing, and a lot of it. So I think that that's fantastic, and that's a form of group work. One of my kind of questions was, how do you form your groups? And Professor Ramos was saying in her upper division classes that she selects based on personalities and interests, she kind of formulates the groups. But in her freshman classes, she lets them decide. So there's that, option that you have of either creating the groups or letting the students decide. And we'll discuss some of the positive and negatives behind kind of that. And then the last thing would be just surveying. I think Karen mentioned that. Just make sure that the students self-report what the group dynamic was like, what the experience was like. So self-reporting their experience. And you can have, I guess you can also have reporting throughout the group activity, right? So if it's a week or two long, maybe midway through the first week, finding out a little bit more from the group, and then doing a summative review at the end, right? So that's possible. Thank you.
Oh, those are great, Chris. We talked about like maybe doing a contract, having the groups do a contract with each other about what the responsibilities are. We also discussed about peer rating. So every person in the group would rate the other members and themselves. So they would give, everybody gives themselves a rating, and then the average rating is what grade they would get connected to that project. So that would differentiate a little bit. And then we talked a little bit about like that how, if somebody's not doing their work, the learning in that, how do they deal with that? What kind of skills can they develop about holding their peers accountable?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Another group?
Yeah, I don't know. Did I cut anybody off? Anybody else have any other ideas?
No, but I'd like
Oh, I'm sorry. I was
follow up
wondering
on
if anyone wanted to
what
share
Carol
how
was
it
saying.
changed. Go ahead, Karen.
I'll answer that as well. Carol's mention of accountability. How do you act with compassion and empathy and accountability? Very difficult set of skills, to communicate and experience. And so and I think with respect to diversity and equity and inclusion, this is especially where giving the benefit of the doubt comes into play. But also say, we want to perform as best we can, but we also recognize there are a lot of challenges that we have and multiple roles that we play. One of the differences between in-person versus virtual we talked about in our group was, if you have 5 groups working in a classroom, you can kind of have vision and oversight over all of them to see which groups are really functioning well, you know, are on task and which aren't. But breakout rooms, you're blind to that. And so some rooms, they're functioning quite well, and others you enter and it's crickets. It's like, hello, is anyone in here? You know, and it's completely quiet, and you can't get that big picture sense of what's going on in your classroom virtually. And so that's definitely different. And then lack of visual information too. If everybody's just a name on the screen, that's so hard to cultivate a sense of community and openness to converse, or willingness to converse.
I also think it has to do with people's personalities as well, because some people are more outgoing and willing to speak up in a group and share their ideas very easily. And then there's other people that don't have that personality or maybe the desire. And so I feel like sometimes groups don't want to work together because one or two people are doing all the work and other people aren't doing anything or saying anything.
So any other additional comments regarding group work, just your personal experiences, Chris or Jonathan, in your breakout sessions?
We didn't get so much into the pandemic, but talking about it. But one thing that did affect me was even this past fall, even the debate of a lot of these students weren't initially wearing masks the first few weeks, or like, what is the ethical ramifications of being like, hey, you're going to be in a group, but you're going to have to get closer than 6 feet to work together type of deal. So that's one ethical ramification that the pandemic is happening for in-person learning, let alone everything I was mentioned already online. Like now with vaccinations, maybe that's a little less of a concern for folks, but you're like, hey, get together in your groups, but it's still a thing to consider.
Good point.
And in our group, a lot of what we focused on seems to be how to put different students together in groups, because especially in the freshman level courses, a lot of students will self-select, and it's often someone that's someone that's a peer, whether they're the same sport, they've known each other from high school, they may have had other classes with each other, and et cetera, et cetera. And Rick brought in an idea that he does because, well, all of us were STEM teachers. It's Amaya, Rick, and myself, so that's biology and chemistry. So lab is going to be a big component. And in our labs, students are going to have to work together. Now, in some labs, some students will self-select based on the kind of people who they know they can work with very well. But what about students who don't know anyone else in the room? How do they know how they're going to be compatible with each other? Rick has an idea for that. Every, I believe, week, his students rotate partners. He has a system in where he essentially calls it a round robin, where students will be able to work with different students on different experiments. And I can see that also, that in a way, this is how students can not just know who they're compatible with when it comes to working in this particular lab, but who they may be compatible with working with anything in the future.
Great. Well, thank you. I think we'll move on for sake of time, but thank you for all your comments. One image that we decided to put into our presentation is about cooperative learning, and it's derived from social interdependence theory. And what is that? Well, it's kind of like the premise of the theory is that, you know, the way in which the goals are structured determines how individuals interact, and ultimately the outcomes, the learning outcomes. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about this theory, and I'll have Karen begin with the first two.
Sure. So I'll talk about that just very briefly. The first two, starting with the one way at the top there, positive interdependence. As several of you have mentioned, it's really hard to have a successful group unless your students are working together in a positive way and they are depending on each other, right? So it's not just one person taking over the whole group. So this idea of having everybody engaged and everybody paying attention and actively listening and learning. One of the ways you can try to strive towards that is to make sure you have a common goal and you have a common outcome that you're working towards. And that little gray bullet there, individual accountability, refers to then each member and how are they showing that they are responsible to the group. So as you assess each person's performance in the group, are they being responsible to the success of the entire group then? And that's, you've all mentioned that too. That's a really important part of it. It's not just, am I doing my part, but is it helping so that the whole group is successful in attaining that outcome?
Great. And then the third point would be promotive interaction. And this describes ways of communicating with your group members to encourage and facilitate each other's promotive interaction. And trust is a big issue here, right? You have to have trustworthiness between members within the group, and social skills, right? Interpersonal skills, leadership skills, decision-making skills. The fourth element is cooperative learning. Oh, I'm sorry, of cooperative learning is conflict management, right? And so, how do you deal with students that are social loafers, right? As psychologists call them, right? People that don't really do much, they rely on the other group members to do the work. And if issues arise, right, how do we address them? How do we make sure that groups are on task and completing activities successfully? And then group processing, right? That's the final element. The ability of the group to manage and emerge within and have a final product and reach the goal, right? And successfully kind of reach the aims of their goal. And some in the group will do that more than others, but for the most part, there's total engagement by every member of the group. And we're hoping that students can process that when they're evaluating their participation and others' participation within the group itself.
All right. Now, we've all had a feeling that there must be some point and some good in doing some group work. And through the greater part of a lot of literature, there are some commonalities as far as how good group work is, not just for us, the instructors, but also for our students. The first bullet point is rather near and dear to me, generates alternative viewpoints. Now, I know that seems simplistic, but considering everything that's happened, not just because what I feel that is incredibly critical and also dangerous, not just in education, but even perhaps the greater social climate in America, is the echo chamber. That, I think, is going to be an issue, because if you're just listening to a lot of people who are saying the same thing as you, that's just going to build up more and more of a confirmation bias. On the other hand, being able to collaborate with others, whether willingly or forced to in the classroom, you are going to have to be able to learn how to listen and even give alternative viewpoints, even at the cost of looking contrarian, because it is a skill that is going to be critical in society itself. Second, it also allows students to work with others on a project that may be daunting to do alone. And as a chemistry and or physics teacher, I see this a lot, because especially when you're dealing with even either a long list of steps, whether you're getting them off a textbook or coming at them from your own, this could be very difficult to do, especially if you have to do it within one entire day. And even going outside of STEM, there are a lot of even student projects that will not be easy enough to do alone. I mean, I'm sure you can lone wolf it if you can, but it just might be easier if you have, if you've got two or more minds working on the same thing. If not just to delegate labor. Now, number 3, students of different backgrounds, experiences, and skills are able to share what they know from their perspective. Bullet number 3 is the big inclusion statement. So now this is students willingly including others into their group, into their circle. And this is where we're going to get a lot of alternative viewpoints from, because group work will allow, with some finesse, everyone an opportunity to have a voice, and they can spend that voice with bullet number 4, allowing students to be able to teach one another. Because often, especially teachers learning about teaching, it's often said that when a student is able to teach another student, that is a sign, I suppose, of mastery of a topic, no matter how narrow it is. And finally, group work provides a structure where students can practice real-world collaboration for future professional situations, whether this deals with how to work with your peers without losing track, because it's really easy for us to lose the script completely when we're working with our friends, or especially how to not flip your lid when you're working with people you just cannot work with for whatever reason, or how to handle differences of opinion, etc., etc. There's a lot more that I could list, but I am spending too much time on this slide.
And I'll talk about some of it on the next slide, I think. So yeah, continuing with that idea of inclusivity, I think if you just think about group work itself, really lends itself to inclusion of everybody. But it depends on how it's set up. It depends on how you put parameters in place, if you put rules in place for students to specifically, each person has a job, so to speak. But the idea is that we are including everyone and that they are engaged. We want everyone actively participating, not to just sit there and be in the group. But how do you know that, right? And as someone had mentioned, if you are literally in the class and you're doing this face-to-face, you can see that. You can see the expressions. You can see people talking. You can see movement in their body, so you know they're participating. But I think if you look at these potential issues here, if we ask for a show of hands, you've probably all had at least one of these issues when you've done group work. And sometimes this, puts professors off or teachers off, and they're like, I'm just not going to do that because I always have students who take too much time talking and then the rest of them can't talk and that kind of thing. But the questions that are here could come from other members of the group. Like maybe you have a facilitator or a group manager. But if you teach these teamwork skills in that everyone gets a voice and everyone has time to share, then you could have someone just inserting one of these questions. For example, if the group is floundering and they don't know really which direction they should go in, just simply by asking someone, having someone say, what can we do now at this point to help us move forward? Okay, this is where we're at. Like, we need to gather in and we need to think about our goal and how do we move from here? So just by having someone insert that question is going to help you to move in the right direction. And the same thing with all the other ones here. I don't have to read them to you, but it's interesting that if you teach these skills to students and you teach them, here are some things you could ask. They're worded very nicely. They're very polite. It's not, you're not asking anyone to do something that you wouldn't do, but it helps them to move in that right direction, help the whole group to be successful. And we'll talk a little bit more in the assessment part that will help address these issues as well.
Unmute myself there. Yeah, so going into some like equity and inclusion issues considered, because Jonathan brought up some great points there, going back to a couple slides earlier, talking about like students bringing different backgrounds, experiences, and skills. So when we talk about equity and inclusion, group composition is a really big part of it. So I looked through quite a few papers looking for this stuff, and the two that stuck out to me is Oakley et al. 2004 and Grindstuff and Mascarenas. I've mentioned that paper in other faculty academies before, but the first one, group composition is really, really important for group dynamics. So for instance, typical groups should be 3 to 5 people. I've seen dip papers that were like 4 to 5 is best, some 3 to 4 is best. Like it varies, but everyone's usually in the 3 to 5 range, unless it's like a lab based and there's literally space issues. So going into point 1 there, when you form groups, you want to avoid isolating historically underrepresented students. In groups, if you have an isolated underrepresented student, they typically will take a passive role in the group. They're usually regulated to that, and that brings their voice down, and they lose a lot of the benefits of having being in a diverse group. So for example, if you have a team of a group of 4 people, try to have like 2 men, 2 women, or something like that, or all men or all women, or 3 women and a man. You don't want to have 1 woman and 3 men in a group, because that would often relegate the woman in that role to sort of a secretarial or not a necessary leadership role in that. And then in the Grindstaff article, they even mentioned that in groups, if they're isolated, underrepresented students and students of color typically have their abilities underestimated and experiences challenged when in a minority position in a group. So you want to have a diverse group, but you don't want to isolate them. One thing that was mentioned also is that this is more important in freshman and sophomore classes than juniors and seniors, because in the lower level classes, the drop rates go up by a lot. But once they're a junior or senior in a program, that risk is often mitigated. So the isolation isn't as big of an important once they get committed, because then you're getting them ready for the workplace where those considerations aren't going to be. So to go with a quote, for instance, in my freshman year, we had a cell bio project, and we were supposed to get in a group, make a theme that you study, and then make a report. So we were trying to do the group project, and no one wants to hear what I have to say. But then if someone else in the group said something of a similar caliber, it was like, oh, great, we should do this. And I'm like, excuse me, that was something that I came up with what we should do. Why am I not getting credit? So these are very, very, very common issues you see if you have isolated group members like that. So getting down to the next point there with ability heterogeneity, you want groups that are not just all the same level students. You want to have weak students paired with strong students, because that gives weak students, getting back to Jonathan's point of diverse viewpoints, weak students will then see what the stronger students are doing in their group, build upon those study skills, and have a sort of a like, oh, this is a model of what I should be doing. And then the older students have the ability to tutor the weaker students. So you should want to have this variety of abilities in your group. So you should be fairly intentional when you form said groups. So going into the next one there with stereotypical group roles, I already mentioned that, where typically if like boys will take leadership roles in groups, while girls will take more secretarial roles. You have to be very intentional with your group roles, because if you leave them up to the groups, stereotypes will prevail, probably statistically on average there. So you want to be sure that you are conscious about that. And if you are using roles, maybe forcefully change them up, because you want to make sure that students' worth isn't challenged in groups. And then the last one, and this one was talked about mostly in grind stuff, is self-expression of identities, particularly for historically underrepresented students. So starting with a quote, there's this one student where she felt very self-conscious about the things that I might say in the way that I express myself. As a female student of color, you have to be really careful with how you express yourself and really hide or omit things that may be natural to you. It's very natural for me to speak a certain way, but I know that I can't do that because that might make them, referring to white classmates, feel uncomfortable. They might look at me funny. You don't want to feel judged. You don't want to feel like people think less of you because of something that is very natural to you, because you start feeling that what is natural is wrong. So cultural differences amongst minority students can shift their own behavior, and that could also lessen their role. Going back to that group composition. So you do have to be very, very intentional with how you form the groups and setting expectations of group work. So again, so like you want to construct groups of like 3 to 5, depending on setting of mixed ability, trying not to isolate anybody. I've seen mixed literature, whether you want to do this at random or not. I've seen randomness is just as good as being very intentional with that. But changing groups and checking in and getting student feedback is very critical here via peer review, because you may miss a lot. And again, you need to take that into account. Like, why should some of these students trust you with some of that information of what's going on in their groups? So who had, oh, that's good.
Karen, you're on mute, I think. There we go.
Yakking away. No, I was just pointing out Karen Yes's comment in the chat too about how you can assign a leader for the day. I mean, there's all kinds of ways you can do it like that. It's still kind of random, but then it takes that emotion out of it, right? So I had this great idea. I wanted to do this jigsaw strategy, and then Lynn was talking about it, which is great because that means some people know about it already. And I'll be the first to say that this particular instructional strategy or group strategy works best if you're face-to-face, but there are ways that you can modify it for a format like this. So we're going to modify it a little bit, and we'll talk about how you could modify it even further. But we wanted to give you an opportunity to get into a group and try this particular strategy. And this is something that if you are teaching face-to-face, you can do this tomorrow or next week. It's a really great way to increase comprehension. Everyone has to participate because of the way it's set up. And then they also are working on communication skills and how can they become an expert in an area. So we've talked several times, I've heard several people mention that this idea of when you teach something, you become better at it, right? Or you it at least solidifies that content in your mind. So I'll explain how it actually typically works. And if you can picture it in a face-to-face class, that might be the way to picture it for now. And then we'll talk about how we're going to do it here in our session. So when you go into your class, you typically have some overarching topic that you are going to talk about. But if you have 3-hour classes like I do, you typically have several subtopics that you're talking about. So you decide on how many subtopics that you want to address or want your students to learn for that particular session. And as Chris had mentioned, typically your groups are anywhere from 3 to 5. We have 5 subtopics today, so you'll be in groups of 5 if we can get there. 4 will be fine, if not. But that's what you would do. You would number your students out, group, and put them into groups. Okay, so now you have home groups. You have 5 people in each group, and you give them each something different to read. So they each have a different topic to look at or subtopic. And so they will quietly look at that information. You may have some videos, you may have other resources, an article to read or part of an article, and they will read about that one section. They physically then will get up and move and find other people who have read the same thing as them. And this becomes their expert group. So now you have groups of people who have all read the same thing, and they now have an opportunity to have a discussion about that. Did you understand this part? What did you think was the most important? What do you think are some really important details that will help to support that main idea, that kind of thing? Clear up misunderstandings. So they have that opportunity to have discussion with their group. So once you do that, once they have that time for discussion, they go back to their home group and they take that new knowledge that they've made with their expert group, and they now have that chance to teach what they've learned about that subtopic to their whole group. So you go round robin somehow. You know, maybe it makes sense to do it in a certain order, maybe not. But now you have someone who's thoroughly embedded in what that work is, and they feel comfortable sharing it. So you can see how this would be really a great thing, especially for if you have a longer class, because sorry, I'm an elementary teacher background. Students are getting up and physically moving, so their brains are not, they're still moving, they're not falling asleep. But we're going to do part of it here today, and then we'll talk about some other modifications that you can make. So we're going to drop an article into the chat, that has numbered different sections, numbered 1 to 5. And when you get into your breakout room, somehow number yourselves 1 to 4 or 1 to 5, however many you have. And you will find the section in the article that corresponds with your number. So if you're number 2, find number 2, and that's all you need to read. It's anywhere from 4 to 6 paragraphs, and the topic is on group work, which is pretty awesome, right? So you'll learn a little bit more. So we'll give you, I'm going to say again, 8 minutes, I think probably will be enough. And you're just really going to read your section, and then we'll bring you back to the whole group. And those people who have read section 1 will have that opportunity to talk with each other and then share out with us, and the 2s and 3s and so forth. So really what we're missing here in this format is that time for you to actually go to your expert group. We just figured that would be a little challenging to try and do on Zoom. So questions, did that make sense to everybody? Chris P, I know it makes sense to you because we've talked about it.
How is it we know our number?
When you get into your breakout rooms, if you will all just count off somehow.
I see.
And then you pick your number on the article. And I see it up here. Does everybody see it? Do you want to leave it up like that?
So you're doing the same article?
It's all the same article, but
Okay.
once you
Take one
decide-
section of it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So is it in the chat? I didn't look yet. Yep. Okay. So does everybody have that? You can find your article? Okay. I guess if everybody can find the article, then we can get into breakout groups. Yeah. So just a reminder, when you get into your breakout groups, number yourselves off. If you have 4, then you only look at numbers 1 through 4 in the article. And then just read that one section. And you might want to take a few notes just to remember what's important there, so you can share that out, which is what I would say to my students so they don't forget.
And here we go.
Time, right? And
Correct.
now we're going to go into okay.
No, this is what's different about, I don't know if everybody's back. It looks like they are. This is what's different from face-to-face, right? So you would have gone in your home group, read everything, everybody would have read something different, a different section. And then you would have gone to a group where everybody read the same thing.
Okay,
So
that's the opposite of what I do. Yeah, that wouldn't.
taking that piece out, and we're talking about the different parts here instead. And I know that's very different than what it typically is. But I don't think it really matters if you read a different section or if you all read the same section. We can spend a few minutes to talk about those different sections from the article, because I think it really lends itself well to what we're talking about today. But it also hopefully gives you an idea of how you could use this with your students. And maybe that could be something we talk about next, is who has used this before. Obviously, Lynn, I know you have. I have too. And maybe how it could be modified. Like I know I've talked to Denise about using gallery walks and things like that in this type of format. But for people like me who haven't done that yet, I was a little nervous about trying something that I hadn't tried in this, in this particular session. So the idea actually is that you become an expert in one little area. That's really good. So what you're saying is everybody read the same thing in your group?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, they read different things. I usually have people read the same thing in one group, and then they become the expert in a separate different group. Like they have 4 different parts of the article, and then they share it together because they now become the experts on it. So it's just a different way of flipping it. It's a flip way of doing it.
Say it's flipped. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so anyone in that first group or that read section number 1 have any comments or anything that you thought was stuck out for you, or that you would like to teach to somebody? That was a little bit bigger. That section was a little longer.
So I think to me, I don't like doing group work, and I don't really like assigning, but we do a lot of it. So the thing that stuck out to me is that providing proper instruction from start, right? I think that takes a lot of the concern away. Like if you communicate really well how the groups are going to work and what the group needs to do and how it's going to proceed, I think that's a big step in overcoming a lot of the issues.
Right, for sure.
That section also talked about advantages and disadvantages, and I think that's a good thing to point out to the groups, you know, why this is important. It's not just an exercise and to do something, right? So I thought that was a good piece they included on that.
Yeah, and then the idea of steps to go about doing this, decide how you're going to do it, teach the students how it's going to run, then monitor while it's going on and assess what happened afterwards.
I think from that, I didn't read that first. I read the article, but I wasn't reading number one just now. But one thing that stuck out to me is to make sure that students know at this level that we're teaching, when you leave here, hopefully you're going to get a job and you're going to be working with a lot of other people. And most likely in today's world, you're going to be working in teams or groups or something. So this is good practice for that. You know, this is real world practice for that. Anyone else from that first section? How about the second section? That was on.
That's on getting started.
Yeah.
And in getting started, one of the things that they address is the fact that you want to make sure to put it into your syllabus that you're planning on doing this in the class, which goes back to explaining it. And then Chris talked about already that the group size should be at least 3, that they don't recommend trying to do 2 as a group because it's really just a dyad. And then to make sure that when you're assigning, you're thinking about what you're doing. You don't just necessarily want to just go 1, 2, 3, 4, and everybody's a 1, then 2, 3, 4. You want to also look at your class and maybe put people together in those groups ahead of time by knowing your students and then assigning it that way. So depending on what they're doing.
Anyone else from that section? No ideas?
Yeah, Linda already explained a lot of it, but I really, for some reason, focused on the assigning a group part because that's always the critical part. Because while you want to make sure that your students are able to work with each other as best as possible, number one, for a large classroom, you may not know enough about everyone, which is why they did mention in the article that, especially for large classes, sometimes random assignment kind of is the best you can do. But to courses that have a small enrollment, teachers may have built up enough of a rapport with their students that they know what they are, how they learn, how they interact, that they can actually have, that the teacher can actually place students in the groups themselves, so that just so that they can already have a good group dynamic on the go.
Yeah, good point. How about the third section that was on how to teach this or teaching it to students?
One of the things I got that I thought was really would have been helpful for me was the second point, where you reinforce the listening skills and the proper methods to give and receive constructive criticism, and make sure that you model that in the class ahead of time so that when they go into their groups, they're able to do that effectively. And then I think that ties into the third point of that section as well, which recommends that you help students manage conflict and disagreements in the groups rather than breaking up the group if conflict or disagreement comes up. Give them ways to communicate and help them learn how to communicate so that they can work through any conflict or disagreements that they may have.
Thanks, for sure. Thank you.
Yes, Leticia, that second group. So in this section, they talk about teaching students to work in group and how it shouldn't be assumed that they know. And they have then a laundry list of things you can do, how to teach students. And the first one was how to first make sure that the instructions for what they're supposed to do are very clear. And then the second group, the second step that Leticia pointed out also resonated with me, which is providing the how one listens and what is a proper group etiquette. And I've never done this in a classroom. I might try with my 400 level virology. I just remember that we do a lot of work group there because I don't have to cover as many concepts. So there's more of these activities they can do. And something that I've done with faculty groups in the past that I might try in that class is that we have to sign a contract that we all agree of best practices with each other, and we have an opportunity to edit that. You know, anybody sees anything else that we could add that would, you know, what are your expectations? And maybe that might be, I'm not sure, that might be, you know, especially with older students, that might be a way to give them a guide to what proper, besides modeling it, you know, with proper professional behavior in a group and giving them ownership, the fact that they can add something. You know, I really would like my group members to answer emails right away, you know, or something like that. And then, yeah, help manage conflict. That's the students do want those groups to be broken up. You know, I had last year an event where the group wanted this person to go away, and I just said, no, that's not how it's gonna happen. You know, like that doesn't happen at work. That doesn't happen with relatives, you know. So let's think of a different way, because I know you guys are young, and that's a easy solution. You know, can we switch things in? So yeah, and they did a great job. I was actually impressed how well they managed that. So I'm glad I didn't give in.
That's awesome. I like the idea of the contract too, as well. I've never done that.
Yeah, I shared the Oakley article a little bit earlier in the chat, and it has the end example page of team policies that you can share with students, along with a team expectations agreement as well as like a model of a way to do it.
There's some great comments in the chat if you have not looked in there, but we'll have to make sure that we hang on to this so that we can share that with you at the end, because there's a lot of good resources in there as well. Anyone else from 3? Or anyone from 4? 4 was monitoring the process, and how do we do that?
The piece that stuck out for me, I mean, it talks about having, you know, the planning documents, the weekly reports that can be turned into the instructor. But when conflicts arise, that the instructor's role is to work with the group to design their process for working through that. Again, not breaking up the group as others had said, which I thought was interesting. You know, I mean, it makes sense, but I hadn't ever read it that explicitly. The sentence that said Freeman and Greenacre suggest that group intervention should be aimed at the destructive group member, focus on the behavior and not the person, and then address benefits of the group process for the group as a whole. The aimed at the destructive group member, I understand it in theory, but that was a little more aggressive language than I was used to seeing, I guess.
And the funny thing is, I read that section as part of my group, and I had that underlined. That's so funny, because I agree that with the second part of it, focus on the behavior and not the student, but maybe that's what they were intending, because I thought the same thing. Wow, that's kind of hard.
Yeah, it's kind of, don't focus on the person, but aim the intervention at them.
Yeah. Focus on the actual behavior, the behavior that's destructive, and why is it destructive to the group rather than the person that's carrying it out. Maybe.
I just got caught up in the wording of that sentence, I guess. Yeah. Yes, like parenting. Oh my gosh. I wish I could break up those groups some days.
My last name is Davis, so I was glad to see 1993 Davis cited quite a bit on that. So it wasn't me. What I got from this section 4 particularly was the sense of a reset, that in a sense, school is for a place for trying and failing and trying again and resetting over again. And that I sort of picked up that it was a place for experimentation at behavior. Thank you.
Great reminder, yeah. Mess up with joy. All right, how about the last section, section 5? That was a little longer, sorry, evaluation. And we'll talk more about this in the next several slides, but what did you find out about that? Were there 5 in any group?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Ah.
Okay.
I was.
Oh, okay.
They were talking about is the goal to grade the process or the final product or both? And talked about different options for how to have a rubric, how to assign the grades, etc. That's where I could start off.
Yeah, and I think that's an important thing to think ahead of time. If you are using groups and you are going to assign some kind of grade, I think that's really important to think ahead. Are you going to assign a grade to the product, what the group does at the end, has at the end? Or are you, assigning them individual grades for their process in the group work? You could do both, right? You could combine that. But thinking ahead to how you want to evaluate it and then use it for part of their classroom grade, because we still have grades. So we have to figure out how to put that in there. I think that's an important part of it. Any other 5s?
One issue that we talked about is students need to know how they'll be evaluated from the onset, right? So is it the product? Is it the process? Is it both? Like Sargent was saying. The other thing is, will you give an individual grade for each group member, or does the group get a grade? And that can create some conflict sometimes when people feel like they've participated or done more in a group than other students. And then that's about it. I think that one thing that came out of the article for me was discipline specific rubrics, right? So that each kind of field of study should probably have their own way of evaluating group work.
Awesome. So I don't know if this gave you a great idea of how to use Jigsaw, but it's pretty effective. And I would say, after trying to do it here, I totally appreciate all of your participation. And all of you had great nuggets that you pulled, and they were all some of them were fairly different from what other people in your expert group pulled out. So that was interesting. But I hope that you can see the value of not only the idea that students can take a large chunk of information or you can take a large chunk of information and break it down into pieces so that they're not encumbered by learning this whole, massive concept, but they can learn one part of it really well. And I think this is the other piece of, especially at our level, what you need to teach is really active listening, because once they've come back from their expert group and they've presented, you don't want them to just check out then. They need to know the rest of the content, right? So the other subtopics that are being taught to them. So that's a really another great thing that you can teach with this skill or with this strategy. Has anyone used that in this format in a different way? Because I know I've mentioned the gallery walk, but does anybody else have any ideas on how you can use this more effectively?
I've used this many times over the years. I don't use a textbook anymore, and I'll have several different journal article options, and then students self-select which of the half a dozen readings they are most interested in reviewing, and then they will talk with each other who read the same reading. So same thing, check in. What did you understand? What are the key points? What was confusing? And then they share out to the whole. And so students will learn about 6 different topics, but only have the responsibility for reviewing and reading thoroughly one of them. And then we can have a critical reflection discussion on what have we learned about that topic then across these different readings.
Love it. That's great. Okay, moving on. And I think I'm responsible for some of this slide as well. So these are more general and things that you want to think about as far as the roles of students, because we've talked about how you can specifically assign roles to members of groups like the recorder or the general manager, however you want to call it, facilitator. But overall, and again, this goes back to what a lot of you have already said, you need to be specific and direct upfront. What is it we want you to do as you participate in this group? So we know that we want them to be held accountable for their participation. So somehow we need to see that they are participating within their group, and that they are co-constructing and helping to collaborate on that common goal. So that's a really important one, because obviously you can have one person who knows a lot about that topic, or it is more than willing to take over, right? But we don't want that. We want, the idea is that they cooperate together and collaborate so that they're coming to new understandings, because everybody has past experiences and knowledge that they can share that might give a different perspective to that particular project that they're working on. And that kind of goes along with that third bullet point, that they are able to share their ideas and share the responsibilities. We keep saying this, but I think it's so important that, you know, not one person is taking over, and that all 4 or 5 members realize that this is a shared responsibility. It's not just one of us or 2 of us that are doing the work or the reading or whatever it is you want to talk about. So the fact that you are stating these things to them up front, and I love the idea of the contract. This could all be in the contract with the students to say, hey, this is what we expect of you as you get into your groups. And I think,
Great. And continuing on with that, all members of the group should agree on the shared leadership roles. They know what their responsibilities are. Students should respect the opinions and ideas of all group members. And, you know, that's just etiquette, right? And abide by a set of explicit or implicit, perhaps, rules of engagement. So I think they should probably be explicit. The professor, you know, should explain how students should interact. But you could also have, I think all of them, you know, implicitly understand how to respect one another's opinion.
Is there any room for pushback here?
Yes.
of course.
Does anybody sense these statements have a conformist approach? And we're just to play devil's advocate for a moment, all members will agree upon shared leadership roles and will respect the opinions and ideas of all group members. If I'm teaching about oppression and somebody is saying in the group, well, whites are superior and that's why they are in charge of everything, should I respect and encourage students to all abide by that opinion, right? Do you see where I'm going? How do we respectfully disagree with something that is problematic? Do we say, I respect your opinion, when in fact you have no respect for that opinion? What do we do in those circumstances? Or somebody's stating something that's blatantly false in chemistry. I'll just take the sting out of that. It's like, I know this is the truth and this is what I read, and somebody else in the group is like, I so know that's not true.
You mean like people
Just for a little pushback.
You mean like people saying vaccines don't work? That kind of science.
Bingo. Bingo.
Yeah, to me, that goes along with that last bullet point, right? Rules of engagement. And you're right. You have to think about those things, because it's not that we want to say, oh, I respect your opinion and that's okay that you're saying that, because sometimes it's not okay, the things that they're saying. So yeah, that's a very good point.
Just food for thought.
Could that be the
Unpleasant food.
Could that be the role of the instructor, Karen? I mean, if I have a group of students discussing a biology something and they can't agree, I mean, maybe that's a place where
Step in, you mean, and say, let's have a discussion about it.
Oh.
Possible, for sure.
I can respect the process of our conversation, but I can't necessarily respect the opinion that's being provided.
Yeah.
I appreciate that you're willing to share it, but I can't find value in that statement, right? Is that the safest, most respectful way to disengage the person from the comment that's being made, right? I respect you as a person, but man, that idea is stupid. Can't say that, right? So how do we do our best to acknowledge respect for each other while not necessarily respecting the perspective being shared, right?
Well, instead of saying it's stupid, you could say,
Right.
you could say, I'm sorry, but that opinion is not the smart.
Yeah,
I'm
and I
being
think
sarcastic.
I was being facetious. I wouldn't want to role model calling it stupid.
Yeah, I'm being a little facetious as well, but I
Okay.
say turning it around just a little bit and say that opinion is not the smart.
Well, and I think sometimes you can come back and I've had that happen in class before, and just said, okay, well, let's look at that some more. Let's look at what's best practice in our field, and bring up, like I had a student say, well, cannabis cures cancer. And I'm like, okay. And all these other people were agreeing with them. So I'm like, well, let's just look at CDC site. Let's look at the research. Okay, well, it increases appetite. That's awesome. It decreases pain. That's awesome. But we're looking. Do you see anyone, that any article that says it cures cancer? I don't. And I don't know, maybe it does, but we don't have the research yet. So we can't really make that statement because we don't have proof that that's true. So I think, granted, sometimes it's opinion, but you can bring forth the writing and the data from your field to show that most people don't agree with that in the field professionally. So I think that's the best way to stay, so people don't feel like you're just saying you're stupid or your ideas are stupid or your opinion's stupid, and then feel even more isolated because maybe that's their experience, and to say, I understand that might be your experience. Or, Michael M. on this website said, that cannabis cured his cancer. Well, that's awesome, but let's look at the research. So I think that can be a way to handle that.
I love that.
I found, I don't do this as much as others, but in honors, we do get into some of these discussions. And sometimes I think just asking questions, not really taking a value stance on a student's position, because sometimes if we're not careful, that will actually fortify their position because now they're defensive. So I think trying to lead them with the questions that helps them think about why are you feeling this way and how are you defending this stance? And then you can bring in, as Carol says, I think the process by which others might find what their stance is and what those alternatives are. I mean, just I don't know. I don't want to take over the time, but as an example, I've thought through. I have not gotten into the abortion debate with the honors class, and that's one I'm probably just going to avoid above my pay grade. But I would say if I were going to get into that, you might say, okay, are you basing that decision on viability? Are you basing it on, moment of consumption? And what are the logistical, outcomes or how are you writing legislation if that's the basis of your position? And that way you're not having to get into a value judgment, but you're helping students think through what is the basis of their stance, and then what are let's logically follow that out and figure out what the ramifications are.
I like what you said about helping them think it through, because I think it's very easy, like Carol was saying, I think it's very easy, especially for younger college students, to glob onto what their friends are saying. And, oh yeah, I did hear that. And now after they hear it 3 times, it becomes fact in their mind, right? So trying to figure out how to bring them back to your discussion, right? Because somehow it came out of that discussion, but to bring them back to that. And I like the idea that Carol said, let's check this out. Let's look into some research here and see what we can find here. But yeah, having them think that out is really probably one of the most important things they can do, because they might just easily grab onto whatever their friends are saying and think it's okay.
Yeah, or whatever social media is saying. And I think that's important too, because they see so many things on social media. And a lot of times they just look at the title. They don't really look at the research. And then, that I think that's another thing, is just looking at, okay, well, let's look at what this says. Well, I saw that online. Okay, well, let's look at it. And I think it's really important to teach students how to discern, because they're influenced by social media, and they're influenced by their peers,
And
by their
I think
family.
one other source is their family, and that's really tricky to ask them to kind of not disavow, but if this is what they've heard of, depending on the topics, it's very, very family entrenched. And I think to expect that they're going to change their mind, or I don't know, it's very sensitive topics might be difficult because they might feel like they have to, go against what they've been hearing since they were little by everybody in their group.
Wonderful. This is such an important conversation, and I wish we could keep going and further discuss it. But for reasons of time, we do have to move on. I know, Chris, you have a couple of points to make, and then we'll wrap up this presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, I can probably go through this one pretty quickly. Pretty much with the role of educators in assigning the group work, you kind of want to make sure that everyone understands what's going on, clearly presents the goals and objectives, and then outlines specific goals. And then going off of all of these conversations, keep inclusive and equity in mind with these conversations, particularly with creation of the groups and is in constant communications. Because if something like this does pop up in a group, the instructor should probably know that these conversations are happening if it's happening outside of class, because that could affect the group cohesion. So we can probably go on to the next. Yeah.
Right. Now, often whenever we design any activity in class, there usually has to have a point to it. And the most common point that there is some kind of assessment. And this is where our previous knowledge of a lot of curriculum building can come into play, because we don't need to do something whiz bang new and special, just to include these inclusive group activities into our curriculum. I mean, we've got this, I use this a lot. This is the assessment triangle, which means you know what you want your students to learn, which is cognition. You know how you want your students to demonstrate that they've learned this. That would be observation. And then you also need a way for you, the teacher, to figure out how these students have already gained their knowledge. That's great. That's that's a good start. I mean, I use this a lot when I was designing some of my group activities for Chem 150. What do I want them to know? That there is a relationship between how much reactant you have and how fast a reaction can happen. How do I know they've gained it? They're able to propose some kind of procedure in order to test it. How do I know they've done it? I usually have a rubric. That's great if the only product I want from them is a grade. But when it comes to activities like this, especially if we're trying to teach them some social mores, a grade will not be enough. So we'll have to go beyond the grade. What else can we assess and provide other than a grade? Chris has a couple of comments over the next couple of slides on this.
I'm muted there. Yeah, we're running out of time here, so I'll go moderately quickly on assessing the group work here. So for instance, some key areas to consider when evaluating group work is that it should not just be reflective of only the final product of the group. It should take into account the team environment, how each member contributes to the team, the integrity of the team. So are they acting ethically or not, and not just in their own interests, like for instance, being a social loafer or something like that. And accountability is, did everyone follow upon all of the agreed upon tasks? So you would want to consider creation of, again, team policies and team expectations to help break that down, to make it very clear. And also in your rubrics, because you want to have very clear rubrics, have that broken down on how you're going to take into account accountability and integrity of each. So in the next slide, then there's two types, well, there's several types of evaluation. The two I'm focusing on here are peer evaluation. Peer evaluations can help you reveal participation issues that you may not know about, figure out whether some peers are contributing more or less, or if some students have greater stakes in the group or not. And completing early and frequent evaluations will help the group assess where they can improve, where students can improve. For instance, if you come in early on with a social loafer, maybe they'll turn their behavior into something more productive and on a positive note. On the other side, there's the instructor evaluations where you want to assess the performance of the group and the individual members through regular feedback so that they can take that into account and have a positive outcome, and decide on what criteria to base the final evaluations on. So this can be something from a percentage breakdown between, okay, your peer evaluation is going to be this, the group grade is going to be this, and based upon some sort of percentage breakdown, completely up to you how you want to do that. And consider adjusting grades based upon peer evaluations. So like, for instance, I saw one, it's not on the next slide, but I saw one where it's like, okay, the group got this grade. This is a sample peer review rubric that covers a lot of the points. But another one I saw that you had the students peer review, each student got a tally on their peer reviews, and they took that into account, being like, okay, if you got this percentage on your peer reviews, the group grade would get either adjusted up or adjusted down based upon how your peers evaluated your group within certain parameters. So as an example, at the bottom of that, I do have well, I adapted this one from Johns Hopkins, but in the references, the University of Waterloo has a really great list of like a dozen different types of rubrics and ways you can evaluate group work.
So it looks like we're going to run out of time for the final breakout topic. Any last words from our facilitators?
Great. So I just wanted to thank all faculty for attending the last session, this session. We're happy to share our slide presentations with all of you if you'd like to look at them further and maybe kind of see them close up. And we will have the videos available. So if you'd like to come back and see the session once again, I encourage you all to tell your colleagues about the meetings today and have them check them out. We look forward to seeing you at our Faculty Academy presentations throughout spring semester, and we'll have lots of advertisements about that. So best of luck with the beginning of the semester, and thank you so much for your attendance. So nice to see you all. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate you coming.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good session. Thank you.
Have a good weekend.
Thank
Yes,
you.
thank you.